9 years had passed since the Greek armies first beached their black ships on Troy's shores, and the war had settled into a brutal rhythm. By the light of each dawn, men clashed and bled beneath the impenetrable walls of Ilion. By dusk, they gathered their wounded and dead, no closer to victory than the day before. Machaon, now a seasoned battle surgeon, had grown accustomed to the sights and sounds of the siege. The droning war cries, the thud of spears against shields, the endless pleas for a healer amid the din. Yet even as the years wore on, he did not waver in his purpose. Every sunrise found him tightening the straps of his medicinal satchel alongside his armor, steeling himself for another day to preserve life where death reigned. The toll on the Greek camp was not only physical but spiritual. Heroes who once brimmed with youthful zeal now bore the hollow-eyed look of veterans. The plain of Troy itself seemed cursed with stagnation. Neither side could force a decisive end. By the 9th year, frustration and fatigue gnawed at the Achaean host. Whispers of discontent rippled through the tents at night as soldiers murmured that perhaps the gods conspired to prolong their misery. Machaon heard such murmurs while he boiled linens or ground herbs late into the night, and he understood their despair. He too had bound the same comrade's wounds over and over, seen old scars reopened by each new battle. How much blood could soak into Trojan sand before the gods relented? It was in the war's 10th year that disaster struck from an unseen quarter. A mysterious plague began to stalk the Greek camp. It started subtly, an ache here, a fever there. But soon, men were collapsing with raging illness, their skin blotched red and their breath coming hard and fast. Day after day, funeral pyres multiplied as even the stoutest warriors were laid low by this invisible foe. Machaon worked tirelessly alongside his brother Podalirius to treat the afflicted, though it felt like cupping water in his hands while a wave crashed down. They burned cleansing herbs in the sick tents and washed sores with wine and vinegar, but to little avail. Apollo's wrath, the men said, was upon them. The cause of Apollo's fury soon became clear. Chryses, a Trojan priest of Apollo, had come days before to ransom back his daughter, taken captive by Agamemnon. But the proud High King spurned the offer. In retaliation, Apollo had loosed this plague upon the Greeks. Once this truth was known, Achilles, ever bold, called an assembly, determined to appease the god and save the army. There, before the gathered captains, he demanded that Agamemnon return the girl Chryses to her father to lift Apollo's curse. The quarrel turned ugly. Agamemnon flew into a rage at being challenged and, in vengeance for losing his prize, threatened to seize Achilles' own war prize, the maiden Briseis. Insults flew, and in the end, Achilles, enraged by Agamemnon's arrogance, swore he would fight no more. He stormed away to his tents, leaving the Greeks bereft of their champion and the camp in disarray. With Achilles withdrawn from battle, the Greeks soon suffered one setback after another. Prince Hector of Troy led daring assaults that pushed the Achaeans back perilously close to their ships. In clash after clash, Machaon found himself working frantically at the very front lines. There were simply too many wounded to wait for the safety of a medic's tent. He dragged men out of the melee to stanch spurting arteries with quick fingers and packed wounds with yarrow to stop the bleeding. The clash of swords often rang a mere arm's length from him as he worked. If not for the giant Ajax's shield and Odysseus's cunning, the Greeks might well have been driven into the sea during those dark days. One night, beneath a smoky orange sky, Machaon put quill to parchment to pen a careful letter to Anticlea. He spared her the worst of the war's horrors and instead filled his message with hope. He wrote that he was safe and that he carried her love and the thought of their little son with him always. He promised he would return to them as soon as the gods allowed. Far away in green Phare, Anticlea received this missive weeks later. In a quiet courtyard perfumed by late summer jasmine, She held Machaon's parchment in trembling hands. She read his gentle reassurances over and over, tracing the lines as though they were a tender touch from afar. Little Nicomachus played at her feet, giggling as he chased a butterfly across the flagstones. Anticlea managed to smile at the sight, but her eyes shone with tears. She lifted her face to the darkening sky, whispering a prayer to Apollo and to Asclepius to guard her beloved. Though her homeland was peaceful compared to Troy, her heart fought its own war of worry each day. Still, she squared her shoulders and resolved to endure. She would keep their household and healing traditions alive, tending the sick in her father's small court as she had since girlhood. It was the only way she knew to honor Machaon's absence, by living as if he were by her side, upholding the same values of care and compassion. With a final soft kiss pressed to the letter's parchment, Anticlea folded it away. Tomorrow she would gather herbs at dawn, as Machaon would have, and teach little Nicomachus how to water the medicinal garden. Life on the home front was quieter, yes, but in its own way, a daily act of courage and faith. The war raged on without Achilles, and the cost grew terrible. Deprived of their mightiest warrior, the Greeks saw the Trojans gain ground relentlessly. King Agamemnon's earlier confidence gave way to grim resolve as he hurled wave after wave of troops against Troy's defenses, trying to compensate for Achilles' absence. The beach soon overflowed with injured men after each clash. Machaon's field hospital, a tent of sails marked with the serpent and staff standard, was ceaselessly busy. He and Podalirius snatched sleep in brief snatches, an hour here or there when night fell. Even in dreams, Machaon heard the groans of the wounded and the cries of "Surgeon, over here," echoing in his mind. In the thick of a pitched battle that autumn, fate demanded a personal price from the healer. The Trojans, emboldened by their successes, launched an assault on the Greek camp itself, seeking to burn the ships. Flames and black smoke rose as Trojan torches found a few unlucky hulls. Machaon was racing along the defensive trench, a satchel of salves slung at his hip, when he felt a sudden white-hot punch in his shoulder. He staggered, stunned, and looked down to see the feathered shaft of an arrow protruding just below his left collarbone. A Trojan arrow loosed from the wall by Paris's bow, though Machaon did not know the archer. Blood began to soak his tunic. His head swam with pain. He pressed a hand instinctively to the wound, but his knees buckled. He would have collapsed on the spot had a pair of strong arms not caught him from behind. It was old Nestor, of all people, who had swept in on his chariot and spotted Machaon in distress. The veteran king hauled the wounded surgeon onto the chariot's floor, shouting to his son Antilochus to drive them out of the fray. Machaon protested weakly. "The wounded! I must tend to them." But Nestor silenced him with a rare, stern glare. "You are wounded now, boy. Let others tend the injured for the moment. We must save you, or who will save the rest of us?" The truth of those words blurred with the agony throbbing in Machaon's shoulder. He acquiesced, slumping as Nestor's chariot sped toward the safety of the ships. At Nestor's own tent by the shoreline, they gently lowered Machaon onto a pallet. Podalirius was there in moments, alerted by Antilochus's shout. Seeing the arrow lodged deep in his brother's shoulder, Podalirius set his jaw, fighting down panic. It was a cruel reversal of roles. The healer who had mended so many now lay stricken, needing the same skills he had given others. Machaon, teeth clenched against the pain, managed a wan smile. "Just a scratch, brother," he murmured through ragged breaths, echoing the very lie countless soldiers had told him. Podalirius puffed half a laugh, half a sob, and knelt to examine the wound. The arrowhead was buried near the shoulder joint. Any movement sent lances of fire down Machaon's arm. Working swiftly, Podalirius cleansed the area with strong wine. Machaon gasped at the liquid fire searing into his flesh, but he nodded for his brother to continue. Podalirius broke off the arrow's shaft, then with a single smooth motion, pulled the barbed head free. Pain exploded white-hot across Machaon's vision. He roared despite himself, the sound muffled into Nestor's cloak. But it was done. The cruel barb clattered into a bronze basin, slick with blood. Podalirius crushed a pinch of herbs Achilles had provided and mixed them into a poultice with wine and honey. The sharp scent of myrrh and poppy filled the tent as he packed the wound to stanch the bleeding and dull the pain. Then he threaded a fine needle with clean gut and with hands as steady as Machaon's own, stitched the torn flesh closed. Machaon bit down hard on a strip of leather but made no further sound. Within moments it was over. The arrow was out and the wound bound snugly. "Rest now," Podalirius urged, easing him back onto the pallet. Nestor handed Machaon a cup of watered wine laced with a few drops of opium. Machaon drank gratefully, the bitter draught numbing his senses. As exhaustion overtook him, he realized he could let go, just for a short while, of the crushing responsibility he carried. Others would tend the men that night. Patroclus had poked his head in earlier, bringing that vial of herbs. Now he hovered at the tent flap, concerned. Machaon managed a faint nod to reassure him, before sleep pulled him under. He awoke at dawn the next day, aching but alive. His shoulder throbbed under fresh bandages. To his surprise, Achilles himself stood at the foot of his cot. The proud warrior, so aloof in his wrath these past weeks, looked almost contrite. "You gave us a scare, healer," Achilles said softly. "How do you feel?" Machaon pushed himself upright gingerly. "I'll live," he replied with a crooked smile. Achilles nodded. Guilt flickered in the hero's eyes, as if seeing the toll his absence had taken. Machaon seized the moment. "Many are wounded, Achilles, more each day. We do what we can, but without you out there." He didn't finish the thought aloud, but Achilles understood. The warrior's jaw tightened. "Hector's rampage ends today, I swear it." With that, Achilles turned on his heel and strode out, determination in his step. True to his word, Achilles did indeed return to battle at the Greeks' darkest hour, but only after his beloved friend Patroclus, who had donned Achilles' armor to rally the troops, was slain by Hector on the plain. When Achilles learned of Patroclus' death, his anguished cry pierced the air. It was said even the gods on Olympus shuddered to hear it. Consumed by grief and rage, Achilles rejoined the fray with a vengeance. He slew Hector in single combat and, in his wrath, defiled the Trojan prince's body by dragging it behind his chariot. The Greeks exulted at Hector's fall, but Machaon turned away. Even in victory's moment, the sight of such wanton cruelty made the healer's soul ache. Achilles had triumphed over Hector, but fate had one more blow in store. Not long after Hector's fall, Achilles himself met his fate, struck by a Trojan arrow, loosed by Paris, that pierced his one vulnerable spot. The mightiest of the Greeks was gone in an instant. A wave of shock and grief rippled through the camp. Achilles was given a hero's funeral, his ashes laid beside Patroclus's. Yet even as the pyres smoldered, the war churned on. Fresh allies arrived to bolster Troy's defense, prolonging the agony on both sides. Achilles' death stunned the Greek army. For a moment, despair threatened to engulf the camp. If even godlike Achilles could fall, what hope remained for any of them to leave Troy alive? But new resolve was forged in the crucible of that grief. Young Neoptolemus, Achilles' own son, arrived from distant Skyros to take up his father's armor and cause. The Trojans, too, gained fierce reinforcements. Ethiopian King Memnon with his bronze host, and Prince Eurypylus of Mysia, golden-haired and tall as a god, the very youth whose life Machaon had saved on a misty Mysian field years before. When word spread that Eurypylus had come to fight for Troy, Machaon's heart clenched. He remembered the pale, wounded boy in Telephus's courtyard and the grateful eyes of father and son. He wondered what twist of destiny had led Eurypylus here as an enemy. and whether the memory of mercy would mean anything on this blood-soaked shore. For a time, the war hung in a desperate balance. Achilles' heir and other heroes like Odysseus and Diomedes rallied the Greeks, while Hector's cousin Aeneas and the foreign allies rallied the Trojans. Great champions fell on both sides. Even the mighty Ajax, unbowed in battle, met a tragic end off the field. Humiliated when Achilles' armor was judged to Odysseus, Ajax descended into a madness of wounded pride and took his own life in a midnight despair. The Greeks were shaken to the core by the suicide of one of their greatest, and Machaon privately felt his faith in the war's purpose waning. Yet even in despair, Machaon did not forsake his role. He continued to treat any and all who needed him, Greek or Trojan prisoner alike, offering what solace he could. His medical tent became a sanctuary amid the turmoil. Many soldiers came to regard him with a kind of reverence. "The healer at war," they whispered, "a man touched by the gods' grace." Machaon took little notice of such talk. He was too consumed with the next task, the next patient's cry. Still, the steady light of his compassion in that dark time did not go unremarked. Odysseus commented quietly one evening to Agamemnon that if all men were like Machaon, perhaps the war would have ended long ago. It was a half jest, but it rang with truth. At last, in the war's final year, the endgame began. The Trojans, emboldened by their new allies, made one last grand push against the Greeks. Under Prince Eurypylus' command, their forces surged from the city gates one clear spring morning, desperate to turn the tide. The Greeks, for their part, were equally determined to finish the war and avenge their fallen heroes. Both armies met on the open plain in front of Troy as the sun rose red behind the city's walls. With a thunderous crash, the opposing lines collided. The final battle for Troy had begun. The earth shook with the ferocity of the combat. Young Neoptolemus cut a fiery path, keen to live up to his father's name. Odysseus and Menelaus fought back-to-back, driving into the Trojan ranks. On the Trojan side, Aeneas led a chariot charge on the flanks, while Eurypylus wreaked havoc in the center, the boar's head crest on his helm flashing through the dust. Through the chaos, Machaon caught glimpses of the Mysian prince's deadly work. Eurypylus moved with a grace and ferocity that reminded him of Achilles in his prime. Machaon's heart grew heavy. Could Eurypylus possibly know that the Greek healer across the field was the same man who had once saved his life? And if he did, would it matter at all? War had a cruel way of drowning such memories in bloodlust.